It was one of those nights that started like any other. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second dragging longer than the last. I sat on the couch, the television playing some late-night show I wasn't really watching. My phone buzzed occasionally with notifications, but none of them were from her. She had texted earlier in the evening, saying she'd be late some work party she couldn't skip. I didn't think much of it at the time. Work events were part of her job, and she'd always been responsible, always let me know when she'd be home. But as the hours stretched on, a gnawing unease settled in my chest. Something felt off. I tried to shake the feeling, telling myself I was overthinking. Maybe the party ran late. Maybe she lost track of time. But deep down, I knew this was different. The silence was louder than usual, and the house felt emptier without her. I paced the living room, glancing at my phone every few minutes, hoping for a text, a call, anything. Nothing came. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. My worry turned to frustration, then to anger. Where was she? Why wasn't she answering? Finally, around 2:30 a.m., I heard the faint sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The front door creaked open, and the smell hit me, first cigarettes and a cologne that wasn't mine. My stomach churned. She stumbled in, her heels dangling from one hand, her dress wrinkled and slightly askew. Her makeup was smudged, her hair a mess. She was drunk, barely able to stand straight. My heart sank as I took her in. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman I knew. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't bring myself to ask them. Not now. Not like this. She mumbled something incoherent, her words slurred and barely audible. I stepped forward, catching her as she swayed dangerously close to the edge of the staircase. Her body felt heavy against mine, her breath reeking of alcohol and something else I couldn't quite place. My chest tightened as I guided her toward the bedroom, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and dread. The walk to the bedroom felt like an eternity. Every step was a reminder of how wrong this was, how far removed from the life we'd built together. I laid her down on the bed, her head lolling to the side as she mumbled something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to send a chill down my spine. She laughed softly, a sound that was both familiar and foreign, and then her eyes fluttered shut. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I thought I knew. The smell of cigarettes and cologne lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of where she'd been, of who she'd been with. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Who was he? What had they done? The questions burned, but I pushed them aside. She was in no state to answer them now. Tomorrow, we'd talk. Tomorrow, I'd get the truth. For now, all I could do was make sure she was safe. I pulled the blanket over her, tucking her in like I had so many times before. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like an act of duty, not love. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep, my mind a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, they all swirled together, threatening to consume me. I wanted to shake her awake, to demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. She was too far gone, too out of it to make sense of anything. Eventually, I stood up and left the room, closing the door softly behind me. The house felt eerily quiet, the weight of the night pressing down on me. I walked back to the living room, sinking into the couch, my head in my hands. Sleep was out of the question. My mind was too busy replaying every detail, every moment of the night. The smell, the way she looked, the way she laughed, it all played on a loop, a cruel reminder of how much had changed in just a few hours. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the blank television screen, my thoughts a tangled mess. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation, something that would make all of this make sense. But another part of me knew better. The truth was staring me in the face, and it was ugly. My wife, the woman I loved, I'd come home late, reeking of another man and cigarettes, and I had no idea what to do about it. As I laid her down on the bed, she mumbled something under her breath. At first, I thought I misheard her. The words were slurred, barely audible, but they cut through the silence like a knife. "I'm so sick of you, you loser. Why didn't I leave you at the altar?" My hands froze mid-motion, the blanket slipping from my grip. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest, hoping I'd misunderstood. But then she said it again, louder this time, her voice dripping with contempt. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the same woman I'd vowed to spend my life with. The woman who had stood beside me at the altar, smiling through tears as we promised to love each other forever. That woman was gone, replaced by this stranger lying in our bed, her words sharp and cruel. My chest tightened, a mix of anger and disbelief swirling inside me. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I leaned closer, my voice trembling as I asked, "What did you say?" Part of me hoped I'd misheard her, that this was just the alcohol talking. But deep down, I knew better. Her laughter confirmed it, a cold, bitter sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "You heard exactly what I said," she slurred, her eyes half closed, a smirk playing on her lips. And then, as if to twist the knife further, she added, "By the way, I'm pregnant, from my boss." The room spun. Her words echoed in my mind, each one more painful than the last. Pregnant, from her boss. The betrayal was suffocating, a weight pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I stumbled back, my legs weak, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to us? To me, the questions came in a flood, each one more agonizing than the last. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner, for not noticing the signs. The late nights, the excuses, the distance between us, it all made sense now. I turned away from her, unable to look at her any longer. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms as I tried to steady myself. The anger was overwhelming, a fire burning in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. She was drunk, out of it, and there was no point in trying to reason with her now. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me, the sound echoing through the house. I paced the hallway, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all swirled together, threatening to consume me. I wanted to scream, to break something, to do anything to release the pain building inside me. But I couldn't. Instead, I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, my head in my hands. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. My wife, the woman I loved, had not only cheated on me, but had thrown it in my face with such cruelty. The words she'd said played on a loop in my mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. "I'm so sick of you, you loser. Why didn't I leave you at the altar?" The venom in her voice, the way she'd laughed it, was like she'd been waiting to say those words for years. And the pregnancy, that was the final blow, the thing that shattered whatever hope I had left. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my heart aching. Part of me wanted to go back into that room, to demand answers, to make her explain how she could do this to us. But another part of me knew it wouldn't do any good. She was drunk, out of it, and anything she said now would only make things worse. Tomorrow, we'd talk. Tomorrow, I'd get the truth. But for now, all I could do was sit there, alone in the dark, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. The house was eerily quiet, the silence amplifying the storm raging inside me. I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, the promises we'd made. It all felt like a lie now, a facade that had been shattered in an instant. I thought about the future we'd planned, the family we'd talked about starting. That future was gone now, replaced by a reality I couldn't bear to face. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I dragged myself to the couch, collapsing onto it with a heavy sigh. Sleep was impossible, but I closed my eyes anyway, hoping to escape the pain, even if just for a moment. But there was no escape. Her words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of how much had changed in just one night. I'm so sick of you, you loser. Why didn't I leave you at the altar? The words haunted me, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, my body stiff and aching. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt harsh, a cruel reminder that the world kept moving, even when mine had fallen apart. My head throbbed, a dull ache that matched the heaviness in my chest. For a moment, I lay there, disoriented, trying to piece together the fragments of the night before. And then it all came rushing back, the smell of cigarettes and cologne, her slurred words, the laughter that had cut deeper than any knife. The weight of it all pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face with my hands, trying to shake off the fog of exhaustion. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt suffocating. She was still in the bedroom, asleep. I couldn't bring myself to face her, not yet. Instead, I sat there, staring at the blank television screen, my mind replaying every moment of the previous night. The way she'd stumbled through the door, the way she'd looked at me, the words she'd said, it all played on a loop, a nightmare I couldn't escape. I thought about the times she'd come home late, the excuses she'd made. Work ran late. Traffic was terrible. I lost track of time. I'd believed her every time, never once doubting her. How could I have been so blind? The signs were there, clear as day, but I'd chosen to ignore them, to trust her. And now, here I was, sitting alone on the couch, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. The betrayal was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on me until I felt like I was drowning. I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, the promises we'd made. It all felt like a lie now, a facade that had been shattered in an instant. I thought about the future we'd planned, the family we'd talked about starting. That future was gone now, replaced by a reality I couldn't bear to face. I stood up, pacing the living room, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? How was I supposed to move forward from this? The questions came in a flood, each one more agonizing than the last. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner, for not noticing the signs. The late nights, the excuses, the distance between us, it all made sense now. And yet, it didn't. How could she do this to us, to me? I thought about confronting her, demanding answers, but the thought made my stomach churn. What good would it do? She'd already said enough last night, her words cutting deeper than any knife. I'm so sick of you, you loser. Why didn't I leave you at the altar? The venom in her voice, the way she'd laughed it, was like she'd been waiting to say those words for years. And the pregnancy, that was the final blow, the thing that shattered whatever hope I had left. I walked to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water with shaking hands. The cool liquid did little to ease the ache in my chest, but it gave me something to focus on, something to ground me. I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the empty street outside. The world kept moving, oblivious to the pain I was feeling. Cars drove by, people walked their dogs. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I thought about the man she'd been with, her boss. What did he have that I didn't? Was it the money, the power, the status? Or was it something else? Something deeper? The questions gnawed at me, but I knew there were no answers. Not really. It didn't matter why she'd done it. What mattered was that she had, and there was no coming back from that. I thought about leaving, packing my things and walking out the door. But where would I go? This was my home, the life I'd built with her. The thought of starting over, of rebuilding from scratch, was overwhelming. And yet, staying felt impossible. How could I live in this house, sleep in that bed, knowing what she'd done? The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her hair a mess, her eyes bloodshot. She looked different, sober, but distant. There was no trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with, just a stranger wearing her face. We stared at each other for a moment, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I broke the silence. Is it true? Are you pregnant with his child? My voice was steady, but inside I was falling apart. She didn't deny it. Instead, she shrugged, as if it didn't matter. It just happened, she said, at the work party, in front of everyone. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, the humiliation unbearable. In front of everyone, the thought made my stomach churn, the betrayal even more painful. I felt my anger boiling over, but I forced myself to stay calm. We're done, I said. You can have whatever you want. Just get out. The words felt foreign, like they were coming from someone else. But they were mine, and I meant them. She didn't argue, didn't try to explain. She just nodded, turning and walking away. And just like that, it was over. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, the air in the house felt heavier, charged with tension. She looked different, sober, but distant, her face pale and drawn. Her hair was tangled, her clothes wrinkled from the night before. She avoided my eyes as she shuffled into the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was bracing herself for what was coming. I stood there, watching her, my heart pounding in my chest. The anger I'd been holding back all night bubbled to the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for shouting or accusations. This was the time for answers. I followed her into the kitchen, leaning against the counter as she poured herself a glass of water. The silence between us was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Is it true? I asked, my voice low but steady. Are you pregnant with his child? The words felt like poison on my tongue, but I had to know. She didn't look at me, didn't even flinch. Instead, she shrugged, as if it didn't matter. It just happened, she said, her voice flat, emotionless. At the work party, in front of everyone. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, the humiliation unbearable. In front of everyone, the thought made my stomach churn, the betrayal even more painful. I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms as I tried to steady myself. How could she be so casual about it? How could she stand there, acting like it was nothing, like she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built together? I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to make her understand the pain she'd caused. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even trying to defend herself. She just stood there, sipping her water, her expression blank, like she'd already checked out of this conversation, out of this marriage. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was who she was now. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by this stranger who didn't seem to care about me or the life we'd shared. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. We're done, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. You can have whatever you want. Just get out. The words felt foreign, like they were coming from someone else. But they were mine, and I meant them. She didn't argue, didn't try to explain. She just nodded, setting her glass down on the counter and turning to leave the room. And just like that, it was over. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where she'd been, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to call her back, to demand more answers, to make her explain how she could do this to us. But another part of me knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done, and no amount of talking could fix it. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, the weight of everything crashing down all at once. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. The house felt emptier now, the silence more oppressive. I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, the promises we'd made. It all felt like a lie now, a facade that had been shattered in an instant. I thought about the future we'd planned, the family we'd talked about starting. That future was gone now, replaced by a reality I couldn't bear to face. I heard her moving around in the bedroom, the sound of drawers opening and closing as she packed her things. The finality of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. This was really happening. She was really leaving. And there was nothing I could do to stop her. I felt a lump rise in my throat, the tears threatening to spill over, but I forced them back. I wouldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of her. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, suitcase in hand, she paused in the doorway, looking at me for the first time since the conversation began. There was something in her eyes, regret, maybe, or guilt, but it was gone before I could be sure. "I'll be in touch," she said, her voice soft but firm. And then she was gone, the sound of the front door closing behind her echoing through the house. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all swirled together, threatening to consume me. I thought about the man she'd been with, her boss. What did he have that I didn't? Was it the money, the power, the status, or was it something else, something deeper? The questions gnawed at me, but I knew there were no answers. Not really. It didn't matter why she'd done it. What mattered was that she had, and there was no coming back from that. Eventually, I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. I walked to the living room, sinking onto the couch, my head in my hands. The house felt different now, colder, emptier. It wasn't a home anymore, just a shell of what it used to be. I thought about leaving, packing my things, and walking out the door. But where would I go? This was my life, my space, and I wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. As I sat there staring at the blank television screen, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of what I didn't know. But I couldn't let her betrayal define me. I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life, even if it felt impossible right now. And as I sat there, alone in the silence, I made myself a promise. I would get through this. No matter how hard it was, no matter how much it hurt, I would survive. And one day, I would be okay again. The days that followed were a blur, a haze of numbness and pain that I couldn't seem to shake. She was gone, her presence erased from the house. But the weight of her betrayal lingered in every corner. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of how empty my life had become. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost, unable to focus, unable to think beyond the ache in my chest. The house felt different now, cold, lifeless. It wasn't a home anymore, just a shell of what it used to be. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself from the thoughts that threatened to consume me. I cleaned the house, scrubbing every surface until my hands were raw, as if I could wash away the memories along with the dirt. I threw out anything that reminded me of her photos, clothes, the little trinkets she'd left behind. But no matter how much I cleaned, how much I threw away, the pain remained. It was like a shadow, following me wherever I went, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind would race with thoughts of her, of what she'd done, of the life we'd shared. I replayed every moment, every word, trying to make sense of it all. How could she do this to us? To me, the questions haunted me, but there were no answers, no closure. Just the empty space beside me in bed, a space that would never be filled again. I thought about the man she'd been with, her boss. What did he have that I didn't? Was it the money, the power, the status? Or was it something else? Something deeper? The questions gnawed at me, but I knew there were no answers. Not really. It didn't matter why she'd done it. What mattered was that she had, and there was no coming back from that. I tried to focus on the future, on rebuilding my life, but the thought of starting over was overwhelming. How was I supposed to move forward when everything I'd known had been ripped away? I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, with no idea where to go or what to do. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. I had to find a way to heal, to move on, even if it felt impossible right now. I started small, forcing myself to get out of bed each morning, to shower, to eat. I went for walks, the fresh air helping to clear my mind, even if only for a little while. I reached out to friends, to family, people I hadn't spoken to in months. They were supportive, understanding, but their words of comfort did little to ease the pain. Still, it helped to know I wasn't alone, that there were people who cared about me, who wanted to see me get through this. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a shift, a tiny glimmer of hope breaking through the darkness. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough to keep me going. I started to think about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was a new beginning, a chance to start over, to build a life that was truly mine. I thought about the things I'd always wanted to do, the dreams I'd put on hold for her. Maybe now was the time to pursue them, to focus on myself, to find out who I was without her. The thought was terrifying, but also exhilarating. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom, a sense of possibility. I started to make plans, small ones, at first things I wanted to do, places I wanted to go. I signed up for a class, something I'd always been interested in but never had the time for. I started working out, not to impress anyone, but to feel strong, to feel in control of my body and my life. I even started dating again, tentatively, cautiously, not ready to fully open my heart, but willing to take a chance. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain felt unbearable, when the memories of her, of us, threatened to pull me under. But I kept going, one step at a time, refusing to let her betrayal define me. I wasn't the loser she'd called me that night. I was someone who deserved better, someone who could rise above the pain and come out stronger on the other side. As I stood in the living room one evening, looking out at the sunset, I realized something. I was going to be okay. It would take time, and there would be setbacks, but I was going to make it through this. The pain would fade, the wounds would heal, and one day, I would look back on this as a chapter in my life, not the end of it. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was long, and there were no guarantees, but I was ready to face it. I was ready to move on, to build a life that was truly mine. And as I stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew I would come out stronger on the other side.